The research facility hummed with quiet efficiency, its sterile white walls reflecting the glow of holographic monitors. The Minyan scientists moved methodically, their clawed hands adjusting dials and calibrating instruments with precision. At the center of the chamber, a lone human sat restrained in a containment unit, his breathing steady despite the restraints binding his limbs. Observing from an elevated platform, High Researcher narrowed his golden eyes, analyzing the data streams flowing across his display. Commence reflex testing, he ordered, his voice cold and clinical. A pulse of flashing lights erupted in the chamber, designed to measure visual reaction speed. The human barely blinked. A series of sharp, randomized sounds followed, calibrated to trigger involuntary muscle responses. Again, the subject barely flinched, his gaze locked straight ahead, unreadable. A younger scientist beside shifted uneasily. His readings are abnormal. There's almost no delay between stimulus and response. Dismissed the concern with a flick of his clawed hand. Increase stimulus intensity. Mechanical arms descended from the ceiling, each one tipped with a blunt probe set to strike at calculated angles, meant to test reaction speed and physical stress. The first probe jabbed toward the human's ribs, but before it could land, his entire torso twisted effortlessly, the attack missing by mere millimeters. The second strike came faster, targeting his shoulder. Again, the human's movement was impossibly fluid, his body adjusting before the probe had even completed its trajectory. Van by van, the strikes continued, accelerating beyond what should be perceivable to any sentient being, yet the human avoided them all. The observation deck fell silent. A scientist checked the readings, her claws tapping nervously at her. He's not reacting, he's predicting. Frowned. That wasn't possible. Reflexes were a biological limitation, constrained by neural processing speed. No species could defy the fundamental laws of stimulus and reaction. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Introduce combat simulation, he ordered, his voice quieter now, betraying a rare flicker of uncertainty. A combat drone hovered into the chamber, sleek and efficient, its targeting system locking onto the human in an instant. It fired an energy bolt, designed to provoke an automatic defensive response. The human moved before the shot had even left the barrel, twisting aside with unnatural precision. The drone adjusted, recalibrating its aim to anticipate movement, but it didn't matter. The human was already in motion, a blur of efficiency as he closed the distance in a fraction of a second. The Dominion scientists barely had time to react before the human's hands gripped the drone's frame. A sickening crunch echoed through the chamber as Meta buckled under sheer force. Sparks erupted from the drone's core as the human twisted, tearing the machine apart with terrifying ease. The pieces floated lifelessly in the field, their destruction so sudden, so absolute, that even the seasoned researchers struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. That's not just fast, one scientist whispered, voice trembling. That's something else entirely. For the first time, felt something tighten in his chest, a sensation he had never associated with the primitive species before. He refused to acknowledge it as fear. Restrain him, he snapped, his talons clenching into the meta railing. Security officers rushed to comply, but the moment they moved, the human's head tilted slightly, his eyes locking onto them through the observation glass. It was a subtle motion, but it sent a primal chill through the assembled researchers. It wasn't just awareness. It was calculation. He had already seen their next move. The security team activated the chamber's emergency containment protocols, energy restraints surging to life around the human's limbs. But the instant the system engaged, he moved again. A violent twist of his body sent him into a spin, his legs kicking off the chamber's wall with perfect precision. He tore free from the restraints before they had even fully solidified. The Dominion researchers stood frozen, their training in logic and empirical science failing to provide them with a rational explanation for what they were seeing. Turned sharply to his assistant. Lock down the facility. Now. But before the command could be executed, the human pressed a hand against the chamber's access panel. An instant later, the entire system flickered, the security grid deactivating in a cascade of failed protocols. The human had mapped their technology, and understood it, faster than any Dominion scientist would have thought possible. A voice crackled over the facility's communication system. Containment failure in lab. All units to high alert. Hands shook as he stared at the human, now standing weightless in the chamber, gazing at them through the glass with the unsettling patience of a predator that knew it had already won. The emergency alarms wailed through the research facility, their shrill tones reverberating off the sterile white walls. Security teams rushed through the corridors, their weapons primed, their movements urgent but uncertain. High researcher moved quickly, his clawed feet clicking against the metal flooring as he led a group of scientists toward the command center. His mind reeled at the impossibility of what had just transpired. The human had bypassed their containment systems with an ease that defied logic, moved with a speed and precision that no Dominion warrior could match. That was not reflex. That was something else entirely, something they had not accounted for. Inside the command center, Dominion officers frantically issued orders, their golden eyes scanning the holographic projections displaying the facility's layout. A single, pulsating red dot moved through the complex with unsettling fluidity, weaving between security teams, avoiding traps, exploiting every gap in their defenses as if he had memorized the facility's blueprints long before stepping foot inside. When officer turned to, his voice strained. "He's not running. He's hunting." Refused to accept that. Humans were adaptable, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But they were not superior to the Dominion. His claws tapped against the command console as he pulled up the security feed. The human moved like a shadow, gliding through corridors, evading detection with impossible precision. When security team, stationed at an intersection, spotted him and raised their weapons. But before they could fire, the human was already in motion. He ducked, rolled forward, and closed the distance in a heartbeat. A single strike sent the first guard collapsing to the ground, unconscious before he even registered the attack. The second fired, but the human twisted out of the way, his body responding before the trigger was even pulled. A vicious blow to the warrior's midsection sent him crumpling. The last guard attempted to retreat, but the human caught him by the arm, twisted, and sent him crashing into the wall. 3 Dominion warriors, elite security personnel, defeated in under 5 seconds. Breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just agility. This wasn't just speed. This was something far more terrifying. The officers in the command center stared in stunned silence. When scientist whispered, was barely audible, "That isn't reaction time. That's prediction." The words sent a ripple of unease through the room. Reaction was biological, instinctive, predictable. But prediction required something else entirely, an ability to anticipate movement before it happened, to read intentions before they were acted upon. It required an awareness so acute that it bordered on precognition. And the human had it. Forced himself to think, to push away the fear creeping into his thoughts. Seal the lower levels. Force him into an enclosed space. Cut off his paths. The officers scrambled to comply, activating security barriers throughout the facility. Doors locked, corridors shut down, energy fields hummed to life. The human was fast, but he could not move through solid walls. The Dominion still had control. Or so they thought. Eyes widened as the security feed flickered. The human had stopped running. He stood still, completely motionless, at the center of a sealed corridor. His head tilted slightly as if listening. And then, with deliberate slowness, he reached toward a panel on the wall. The moment his fingers touched it, the entire security grid shuddered. Lights flickered, emergency systems stuttered, and suddenly the carefully orchestrated lockdown collapsed. Doors slid open. Shields failed. Stared in horror as the realization hit him. The human hadn't been running because he was cornered. He had been leading them to this moment, analyzing their responses, mapping their infrastructure, learning their security systems. And now, he had control. An explosion rocked the facility. The lights went dark. Emergency illumination bathed the command center in an ominous red glow. Officers scrambled, issuing panicked orders, but the systems no longer obeyed them. The human had rewritten the rules of engagement. A deep, eerie silence settled over the command center. Then, the communication feed crackled to life. It was him. His voice was calm, controlled, devoid of anger or malice. But that made it all the more terrifying. You wanted to study us, the human said, his tone almost conversational. Now I'm studying you. The feed cut out. Claws clenched against the console, his mind racing. Humans were supposed to be predictable. Their biology, their reactions, their limitations, they were all supposed to fit within measurable parameters. But this one defied all expectations. He didn't react. He acted. He didn't adapt. He controlled. Turned sharply to his officers. Get me a direct line to high command. Now. But before they could respond, the lights flickered again. The screens went dark. The emergency doors unlocked with a hiss. The War Council chamber of the Dominion was silent, an unnatural stillness filling the vast, dimly lit room. High Warlord stood at the head of the assembly, his golden eyes locked onto the holographic projection hovering above the war table. The image flickered, distorting as it replayed the footage yet again. A Dominion strike team, 10 of the Empire's finest warriors, engaging a single human. The battle lasted only 6 seconds. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. The human moved like a phantom, his body shifting before the Dominion soldiers could even react. A warrior fired his plasma rifle, but the human was already gone, his movements a blur. He weaved through the hail of energy fire as if he could see the shots before they were fired. His hands moved with ruthless efficiency, disarming one soldier, twisting his weapon, and using it to take down another before the first body even hit the ground. The rest barely had time to register what had happened before they, too, were on the ground, unconscious, broken, defeated. Not a single wasted movement. Not a single miscalculation. It was as if the human had choreographed the entire encounter before it had even begun. Exhaled slowly, his claws gripping the edge of the war table. Paused the footage. The projection froze, showing the final frame. The human standing amidst the fallen warriors, unscathed, his expression unreadable. A Dominion officer hesitated before speaking. This must be an anomaly, High Warlord. No species moves like this. No species thinks like this. Another warlord, his scales darkened with age, clicked his mandibles in frustration. We have studied their biology. Their reaction times, while impressive, are still within the limits of known physics. What we are witnessing is not possible. Turned his gaze toward the Elden warlord. Then tell me, Elden, how do you explain what we have seen with our own eyes? Had no answer. A low growl of frustration rippled through the chamber. The Dominion was the dominant force in the galaxy. Their empire had spanned countless worlds. Their warriors had crushed innumerable enemies. And yet, here they were, studying a single human like he was some unnatural phenomenon. Another officer, younger and more brash, spoke up. Perhaps they have cybernetic augmentation. Perhaps. Cut him off with a sharp glare. No implants. No modifications. We have scanned them. This is raw, unfiltered ability. A heavy silence followed his words. When of the warlords finally spoke, his voice hushed. Then they are more dangerous than we ever imagined. Straightened, his claws tapping rhythmically against the stone table. We have underestimated them. We assumed they were like all other species, strong, but predictable. Their adaptability is not their greatest strength. It is their ability to anticipate, to analyze, to respond before action is even taken. He turned to face the council. They do not react to war. They control it. The weight of that realization settled upon the warlords like a crushing force. The Dominion had spent centuries perfecting war. But war, to them, had always been about overwhelming force, about numbers, about discipline. The humans were something else entirely. They did not rely on brute strength or superior numbers. They used something far more dangerous: efficiency, intelligence, and the terrifying ability to read their enemies before a battle even began. A holographic strategist, a cold artificial intelligence designed to calculate the odds of war, flickered to life. Analyzing available data, it droned in its monotonous voice. Based on recent encounters, projected probability of victory in direct engagements with human forces has dropped from % to. The numbers flashed on the screen. %. The chamber erupted into whispers of disbelief. A drop that severe in such a short span of time was unheard of. Impossible. Closed his eyes, his mind racing. If these numbers were accurate, then the Dominion's war against humanity was no longer a certainty. It was a gamble. A risk they could not afford. The Dominion had seen countless enemies rise and fall. But this was different. This was the first time in centuries that the great warlords of the Dominion felt something they had long forgotten. Fear. Opened his eyes, his expression dark with resolve. We cannot fight them the way we fight others. We must find another way. One of the younger warlords growled, slamming his fist against the table. Are you suggesting surrender? Golden eyes narrowed. No. I am suggesting we stop thinking of them as prey. He gestured toward the frozen image of the human warrior standing over the fallen Dominion soldiers. Because they are not prey. They are something else entirely. The War Council fell into silence once more. The weight of words hung heavy in the air. For the first time in Dominion history, they had encountered an enemy that did not fear them. The Dominion War Council had never been so quiet. The chamber, once a place of arrogance and absolute authority, now felt suffocating under the weight of an unspoken truth. High Warlord stood at the center, his golden eyes scanning the assembled warlords and strategists, each of them lost in thought, their reptilian faces betraying unease. The flickering red light of the war table cast long shadows across the chamber, illuminating the holographic display before them. When final beta projection, when last attempt to salvage their empire. The war strategist AI flickered to life once more, its cold voice delivering the latest calculations. Probability of Dominion victory in a direct conflict with the human forces, %. The chamber grew even colder. Some of the warlords visibly stiffened, their scaled hands tightening into fists. Others merely exhaled in frustration, their sharp teeth grinding against each other. It was over. They all knew it. The numbers had fallen too far, too fast. Turned to one of the senior warlords, Eldon, whose expression remained stoic despite the disastrous projections. Speak freely, Eldon commanded. Inhaled slowly, his old voice rasping. We have seen war. We have conquered. We have crushed countless civilizations under our heel, and yet, we have never faced anything like them. It is not their technology. It is not even their numbers. It is their ability to think ahead, to react before battle even begins. They do not fight wars the way we do. They do not even fight the way the rest of the galaxy does. His gaze darkened as he looked at the hologram. We thought we were studying them. It was they who were studying us. A younger warlord growled, slamming his fist onto the table. And what would you suggest? Surrender. Gaze did not waver. Surrender may be the only way to ensure survival. The council erupted into furious whispers and sharp hisses. The very word, surrender, was unthinkable. The Dominion had ruled through dominance, through power. To submit to another race was an idea so alien that it sent shivers through the spines of every warlord present. However, remained unmoving, his expression unreadable. We cannot fight them in a conventional war. The data proves it. Every engagement has only shown the same result. His clawed fingers tapped against the war table, and the projection shifted, images of past battles flashing across the room. Dominion fleets burning, warriors cut down with terrifying precision, entire planetary garrisons reduced to nothing in mere hours. We thought their adaptability was their greatest strength. We were wrong. Their true power lies in something we never understood: reflexes, instincts, an ability to anticipate what we will do before we even know ourselves. Another warlord, his voice thick with frustration, hissed, "We should have wiped them out before they ever left their gaze." Snapped toward him. "That was our first mistake. Our second was believing we could still win this war." A long silence followed. Even those who wanted to argue knew there was no point. "The war stretches," AI spoke once more. "Final projections indicate a full Dominion collapse within 2 standard cycles if hostilities continue. Estimated casualties, tota." The word tota sent a chill through the room. The Dominion had never faced extinction before. Now, it loomed over them like a specter, undeniable, inescapable. Took a slow breath before making his decision. "We will not surrender," he declared, his voice firm. Some warlords straightened at the words, hopeful. "But we will not continue fighting either." Confusion spread through the council. Continued, his voice quieter, but heavier with finality. "We will retreat. We will regroup. And we will learn. If we do not, we will be nothing but a cautionary tale, another empire that rose and fell like all the others before us." He turned toward the hologram again, watching as a human warrior moved with terrifying speed, dodging fire, disarming enemies, and striking with ruthless efficiency. "They have studied us. Now it is time we do the same." The warlords did not immediately agree. Some still clung to their pride, their belief in the Dominion's supremacy. But the truth was undeniable. Their empire had spent centuries perfecting the art of war, yet it was not enough. Eldon spoke once more, his voice grave but resolute. "Then we must change, or we will perish." Met his gaze, nodding. "We should have never underestimated them. That was our downfall." He turned to the others, his golden eyes burning with something that had not been in them before. Not fear, not anger, but understanding. "We will survive. But we must become something new." As the warlords left the chamber one by one, some still growling in frustration, others in deep contemplation, remained behind, staring at the flickering projection of humanity's greatest strength, the thing that had brought the Dominion to its knees.